I think about the most important things in our lives that we have to deal with, right? Interpersonal relationships, right? Raising children, taking care of our money. Nothing we learn in school.
No one gives us a manual on
12
the
years
important
in school,
things.
we don't learn it.
Welcome everybody to our financial literacy course as part of the Family That Learns initiative. And today we're doing a 3-part series with Petett, who you would know from Fundamental Fitness Labs, but he says he's a financial geek.
Yeah.
Finance geek. And he has a lot of good knowledge. And I think the way we've been talking about financial literacy through this entire process, I think is a story. And we decided that we wanted to break it into 3 parts of a story so you can have a good understanding and kind of get you really thinking about like how you want to better yourself and gain more knowledge on financial literacy. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you guys to Petett. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and like your experience when it comes to financial literacy and your background?
Yeah, fabulous. Thanks, Jacobsen.
Yeah.
My background, as you said right there, I'm a finance geek, right? I started reading the Wall Street Journal like in junior high. Graduated from University of Oregon, did an MBA down at Santa Clara, so really focused and always on finance, right? That was kind of my focus. Got out of school and then got into sales. Financial sales first and then different other types of sales, but really always had that entrepreneur spirit, right? And that's really what about 3, almost 4 years ago, we founded Fundamental Fitness Labs.
Yeah.
Right, so that kind of got me through. But in that, you learn things in school about finance, and then you get out in the world and you work in finance and you learn what really is going on.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, definitely.
And so that was also really exciting. So we'll share that today.
And I think that's one of the big things that we thought was very important when we started the Family That Learns initiative was like, when we're talking about holistic education, what are the things that are not being taught in schools? And I think financial literacy is grossly being not focused on at all in schools, right. And people are more worried about the math than the dollars and cents.
Oh wow, I never thought of it that way. That's so true. I mean, the purpose of the math is the dollars and cents.
Exactly.
In a lot of ways. Yeah.
And I think it's very interesting, and I think it's very important. So. I think, what would be important is, like we talked about a 3-part series. The first part we're going to be talking about is retirement,
yes.
Which is, I think, super important because if you don't know where you're going or, at least a goal of where you're going, how do you know how to get there?
Exactly.
And then we're going to talk about,
the beginning. We're going to go from the end to the beginning.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
And then we're going to go back to the beginning, which is all about how to start a budget, how to get that going.
Yes.
And then we're going to go into the middle part, which I think is the most important part because I feel that everybody thinks they're in the middle, but really they're in the beginning. But it gives people a way to go into the middle, which I think is super important.
Yeah.
So let's get it started off with retirement. So why is retirement important, at least to you?
Well, it's funny you say that. I look at retirement, in kind of a couple ways. One, I think of a financial independence, more so than retirement, right?
Yeah.
But most of us talk about retirement. And so I think that's why we have to talk about it here is because we don't really even know what that is sometimes.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the biggest thing with retirement is it by choice or just by age?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, do you just get kicked out of work and so now you're retired?
Yeah.
Or, and I think that for a lot of folks, back to your comment earlier, it's like they didn't really plan it. They got up, they went to work, and then they're 40 years later, they're like, oh, I'm supposed to stop now,
Yeah.
But things are so much different than they were 30, 40, 50 years ago as far as opportunities for retirement.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it, and pretty sure if everyone's been at home, if you've been to Walmart, you see the elderly people at the door, helping, checking people's receipts and stuff like that.
Yep.
And that's the retirement plan. It's like, I'm gonna keep working until I die. And I think, a lot of that is because of the way things have changed so dramatically. The cost of things when it comes to inflation versus living expenses has gone up and not have come up to get with each other.
Yep.
So I think that is one of the big things that we need to kind of focus on and get us into a mindset of okay, so what does 60, 65, 70 look like for us?
Right. And I think to your point about things have changed so much, I mean, one of the things I think about is, where's the cash? So you're going to retire, where's your pool of money, right? And what is your pool of money?
Yeah.
And if you think about, again, historically, there was pension funds. Who has pensions anymore?
I've never heard of it.
Right? I mean, literally, unless you're a government worker or like, police or fire, you don't have a pension.
Yeah.
So those folks just worked, and when they retired, their pension is a large percentage. I was going to go in the military as a young person, and I knew when I got 20 years in, you get out with like 60% of your income for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Well, you can live on that.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Not so much. And if you're doing it at a certain age, if you're 20, 30, 40 years in, 30 years in, you might go to a second job, but you still have other income, right? That's a different world than folks now that are trying to live everything on Social Security.
Yeah.
Right, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but that, and then there's, you have IRAs, 401ks, and all the other kind of, real estate, all these other things, and people they're like, yep, I hear about it, I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And so they do nothing.
I think that's where we should start is like, so what is a 401k? What is an IRA? Like, tell me the difference between all these different talks, and let's dig deep.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing with a 401k or an IRA is the key is it's deferred, right? So when I worked in financial services, I'd tell people, hey, you need to, invest $300 a month or $400 a month to get to retirement. And they said, well, I don't have that kind of money to spend. And just when they said that word spend, I realized they didn't hear what I said invest and they said spend. So we were already not in the same, right? And so when you're in a job and you have a 401k, you can put money away tax-free. Yeah. So the first thing is you're not paying taxes on it going in. Right? The second thing is so beautiful about 401k is most companies will match a certain amount.
Yeah.
So if you put in 4% of your income, they put in 4%. So you've just doubled your money if nothing else happened.
Exactly.
So right there, right? So those are the idea. And then an IRA is something outside of a work environment, right? Individual retirement account.
Yeah.
Right? And you can put up to $2,000 a year individually, right? And again, write that off. If you're self-employed, there's a thing called the Roth IRA, which you can actually put in more.
Yeah.
Talk to a professional. That's not what we're doing here, right?
Yep.
But just to get people understanding. But all those are deferred. Yeah. All those are ways to take money, put it aside, not pay Uncle Sam on it right away. When you start pulling it out when you retire, then that's a different thing. But then it's a different income situation as well.
So, I mean, what it really comes into is it's a slow build of assets, which I think that's the big thing that I think a lot of people don't understand. A car is not an asset. I mean, kind of is, but not really. It's a highly depreciating asset.
Right. Not appreciating, but depreciating.
Exactly.
Those are very important differences.
And so when we are putting money into a 401k or a Roth IRA or an IRA, it is very focused on like, this is my investment in my future, or pretty much I'm paying myself 40 years from now.
Right. Well, and I think the thing to think about too is, again, when people say, well, I don't have money to spend on that now, it's like, well, you have money to spend now, and you want money to spend in the future.
Yep.
So this investment is so that you can spend money in the future.
Yep.
Right.
And you get, you also get like interest and everything like that.
Right. The money grows. Right. It's not like just, we'll talk about that with the Rule 72 and some other things later on about compound interest. So.
Perfect. So Social Security. Now, this is something that, my grandmother is on Social Security. My mom is almost at the age where she's going to be in Social Security. What was the beginning of Social Security and what was it for? And then now, like, I'm hearing that I won't even have a Social Security, even though I'm paying for Social Security.
Exactly.
So, like, what is the point of Social Security?
Well, I think that the word itself is Social Security, right? It was just like, it was an extra. Right. So one of the things we didn't talk about, and you may not have heard of either, is called dividends. Have you heard the term dividends?
Yeah, it's like my bank account says like I get 8 cents every like 2 months, and that's a dividend.
Right.
Whoop.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, dividends also come from corporations. So if you own stock in companies, they actually pay dividends as well. Big companies, right? They don't do it as much as they used to.
Yeah.
But again, 20, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, when people were actually thinking, 60 years ago when they were thinking about Social Security being their retirement, dividends were also part of the game for regular people.
Yeah.
So that, they had those little shares of Sears, Robux, and then they gave them dividends every year, and people lived on that money.
Yeah.
Right? So when you think of Social Security, it was a piece of the pie, not the whole pie.
Yeah.
Which is why you talk about like some of the elderly now that are working at, as greeters, they believe that Social Security was going to cover everything.
Yeah.
No one explained it to them. Again, to your point, I think about the most important things in our lives that we have to deal with, right? interpersonal relationships,
Yep.
right? Raising children, taking care of our money. Nothing we learn in school.
No one gives us a manual on
12
the
years
important
in school,
things.
we don't learn anything of that.
Marriage, dating,
Right, all that, none
everything.
of that, right? So when it comes to finances, it's the same way. So these folks said, well, Social Security is going to be X amount of dollars a year when I retire in, 1990,
Yeah.
2000, and that seemed like a lot of money back in 1940 when they were looking at it.
Exactly.
And now it's not.
Yeah, and I think that that attributes again to that inflation curve that like no one. It's more like an inflation mountain that
Right.
we're continuously going on,
Right.
and it's. I think that's what I'm most scared of for myself is like when I'm at 60, like is $1 million, or I mean even $1 million now is not that much, but like is like even $10 million in retirement gonna suffice to anything?
Right.
Or am I going to be able to live off of it? Am I going to be able to give anything to my kids or anything like that? And
Right.
that's always in the back of my mind, especially now that we're talking about financial literacy and we're getting deep into it. Now I'm just like really thinking about like, man, like what do we have to do in the future to be able to be efficient
Yeah.
and survive?
Yep. And I think that kind of leads us into what we had talked about before, which is the difference between retirement and financial independence.
Yep.
Right? Because retirement's an action.
Yes. Yes.
You can retire and not have money, right? But financial independence is a state,
Yep.
a place that you're in where you literally don't have to work,
Yep.
right? So your bills are paid whether you work or not. And that you made a comment about accumulating assets, right?
Yep.
So you have enough assets that your assets pay your bills, then you don't have to work,
Yep.
right? I know some people that I went to school with that were trust funders, and so they graduated from high school not having to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what.
No,
not,
and
we weren't that fortunate.
No, but I think the difference between the trust fund kids and us is their parents were surrounded by people who would teach them these things.
Yes.
It was a part of the culture
Yes.
of them, and for us, especially people of color, it is definitely a culture of like financial independence is still a new concept.
Yes.
It's only 2 or 3 generations old for us. Generational wealth is still new. So I think, when we're talking about financial literacy, we gotta like make it a priority, especially if you're like, for me, I'm the first person, at least in my direct family, that owns their own business, and that also started a nonprofit and all this stuff. And now I'm also in a situation where like I really want to be a good example for like future people, young people that are finding me as a mentor or people looking up to me. Because now I took a blink and all of a sudden I'm 33 and like I'm getting up there, and now people are looking up to me.
Right.
So I think like when people ask me, and when I'm doing talks in colleges, one of the big things that they ask me is like, what were you thinking when you graduated high school? And and honest God truth was, I was never thinking about retirement.
No.
Even I can even say 2 years ago, I was not thinking about retirement.
But at 18, who does?
Exactly.
I mean, it's like that is so far away.
Yes.
At 25, that is so far away that we never even, it doesn't cross our minds unless, to your point, we were in a culture where we're brought up to think about those things.
Yep.
Right. And you mentioned something I thought was interesting. So my family, my mom's side of the family, has a history of property ownership in Louisiana for generations.
Yeah.
Like since, right? And so that side of the family, everyone gets it because to your point, we were all brought up in it.
Yeah.
And so when my aunt wants to do something, she's like, well, we'll see what we're doing with the property. And someone wants to buy some, timber from her. They throw a big number at her. She's like, no, I've been around this a while. That's not a big number to me.
Yeah.
But for a lot of folks, they see a number like $100,000 and they just lose their mind.
Yeah.
And they're out. And
Yeah.
they never build things long term.
Well, yeah, and one of the things that like I find really interesting is like the trust fund, like, and I think it's just really a mentality of the trust fund kids. There's 2 ways of thinking about it. There's the kids who blow it, and they're like, boom, there goes their, $4 or $5 million that they get set up with, or they build on it because they understand that like I want my kids to go and have $4 million when they graduate high school. Right. And I think this is why financial literacy is super important.
Well, and then you talked about something that just runs along that, which is how much do you need? You start thinking, well, how much money do I need? And when I retire, what does it look like? And right, like I look at it now in my mid 50s, looking backwards and saying, I was thinking $1 million. Now I look at like 100. If you get 10% on your money, $100,000 a year is like surviving now. And I say surviving with a family, you're trying to do stuff,
exactly.
Right? But as you move forward, that's going to get less and less.
Oh, for sure.
Right. You don't feel like, we talk about $50,000 a year sounds like a ton of money, but in this city, you're surviving on $50,000.
Yeah,
you're not thriving on $50,000.
Exactly, and the best way to example is like when I was 18, I thought $800 a month of rent was astronomical. It was like, oh my gosh, like you're living in downtown and everything like that. And now I'm like, I wish I could pay $800. I could
find a place somewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think, and that's only in like literally 10 years.
Yep. And then the other thing is, so we think about what we need to start, but let's say you retire at 60 or 65. How long are you going to live?
True.
20 years, 30 years?
I mean, especially with technology, we're hitting easily 3 digits now.
Right. So all of a sudden, now you've worked for 40 years and your money's got to last for 40 years.
Yep.
Right? And so again, there's that thought process of what that looks like. And the key with this part and what we really want to talk about here is just getting people to think about it.
Yeah.
Because we're not even talking
about numbers. We're really just talking
about. If you're
under
30, this hasn't come across your mind.
Yeah.
In a while. And if it is, that's you're a very unique young person.
For sure.
Right? So.
And then, so let's talk about what are the main questions that we should be asking ourselves today, tomorrow, 10 years, or every 10 years a checkup. Like, what are the like questions we should be asking? So, like for instance, what kind of lifestyle do we want to live? Right. Are we having winters in Hawaii then summers in Oregon?
Right. Are you snowbirds?
Are you snowbirds?
Are you snowbirds? Right. And that's huge, right? Do you travel?
Yeah.
Are you hanging out with the grandkids or traveling with what?
Are you generous? Are you donating gifts all the time?
My dad has been retired for a number of years. He actually has a pension, right? He worked government. He's been to Hawaii twice in the last 90 days.
Yeah.
He spent almost a month in Hawaii during the winter. Yeah, right? He's like, it's cold. We're going to Hawaii. Like, they came home a couple weeks ago, and it was 80 degrees when they left, Puerto Vallarta, and they came here, it was like 30 degrees, right? So, but and he's not wanting to go international, like overseas to France or Europe, but Hawaii, Mexico, that's super easy, super close, right? So, what do you want to do with your time? To your point, what do you want to do? And then, and it's not just, one of the things I heard someone say years ago about financial independence, running back to that term, right? It's do what you want with who you want when you want to.
Yep.
I thought, wow, what a great definition, right? And he decides he has some friends he wants to go to Mexico with in the middle of February, so that's what he got to do, right? So it really, I think, as we look and as you think about, what do people want to think about? It's what are your goals? Have they changed?
Yeah.
Right. And then how are we doing Are we doing the right things to get there?
Exactly. And I think, I don't want people to be scared about the idea of like you have to be rich to be doing whatever you want. No, like if you own your own house, all your cars are paid off, you have no debt, and all you're doing is accumulating money, then you don't have to. You can make $150,000 a year and live very comfortably, traveling whenever you want, especially if you own things. So I think like when the big conversation is, do we want retirement, which is the old school way of like thinking financial independence, or do we want financial independence where it's literally bills aren't ever an issue, and also you can leave something behind? Because I think retirement, that mentality back then, it was the idea of like, oh, I want to retire and I want to use all my money up until I die. Every penny. And then when I die, there's nothing for my kids, nothing for my grandkids.
Well, and again, that goes back to what you said. It's a generational mindset, right? And certain generations and certain families understand that. Wait a minute, we can build this over time, and it keeps growing. Right. Or, it's just start over, right? And I think, and then I think the two, as we talk about, you mentioned earlier the idea that, depending on when you started, not everyone's going to have enough. So then what do you do?
Yeah.
Right? And so you talk about the folks that end up having to be greeters or checkers, right? My mom tried to retire a couple times, and she ended up being a consultant because people were like, hey, we need your help. And she had really good skills that people needed. And she's like, well, I'll just do this for a little bit. And of course, that doesn't work for her. And so she had to actually retire, but she was able to do some extra things, make some extra money. It wasn't like she had to, but she was able to.
For sure. And I think that's also another huge thing, because it's like, I imagine the conversations that we have with steel workers or coal miners. As soon as they get done on a pension, they don't know what to do. And like they're frustrated. Me, I couldn't, like, the one thing that I've been thinking about when retirement is definitely like I would love to be more of a community-based like person to help people with like building their businesses up, or like consulting. I think is probably the easiest way for the workaholics to like retire, because it's like, oh, I'm gonna spend 10 hours a week just working with businesses and helping answer their questions and getting them through these things, without the commitment to a business.
Right.
And so the ability to retire and just say, whatever I'm doing is my choice.
Yes.
Versus I have to be a greeter.
Right.
So the difference between being a greeter as like, no, if I don't do it, I have no money, or to, no, my financial independence is like, I'm fine, but I'm doing it because I'm either bored or
I want to talk to people.
Or I want to talk to people.
Get out of the house,
yeah. Like I want to do something with my time.
Yes.
So I think, develop an extra skill that like you can, make extra money throughout your entire life, or be really good at what you do.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's a huge.
Well, and I think too, if people can look at like their hobbies, right? If your hobby is something you love to do, woodworking or whatever, you can do that at your leisure and make extra money versus, right? And you don't have to go to the job all the time that's sucking up your time that you really wish you were doing your hobby.
Yeah.
Because for a lot of folks, people have things they'd rather do than their job, right?
Yep.
So now you get to do those things. And I think again, but then as we talk about this, the key is the plan. And we talked about this from the beginning. What's the plan to get there?
Definitely.
Right. Because otherwise,
you're gonna be struggling. So, one of the big things we talked about also was what are the biggest concerns when you're at retirement? Because I think as much as financial understanding is super important, that even when it comes to our fitness or our health or our mental states, like we never really think of those things as a retirement option. Because it's like, oh, well, when you're retired, do you want to be physically active? Is your health going to be a concern?
Right.
Do you feel that like there are some things that you want to do in the future or work on to maintain your health? And I think a really good example is, I think I was talking to a guy who's like, I have a 102-year-old mom or grandmother who like doesn't need a walker. And it was with Rich.
Oh yeah.
He's like, his aunt doesn't like genetically is fine. Doesn't need a walker. Doesn't need doesn't need medication. She just living her life as another grandma. And if you looked at her, you wouldn't know she's 102. But we're not. We're all not that blessed.
No.
And so like being able to understand like, hey, what is my health going to look like when I'm retired? Like, what umbrellas am I going to have? So making sure that like, hey, if I die, my family's not going to be stuck with this giant funeral costs, or so having life insurance, having again, we talk about legacy. What does your will look like? If you were to die today, will your family be taken care of, or will the state have to decide that for you?
Right. Well, and I think to that point, a couple of parts in that. For the elderly, I was reading some articles, looking at some things. I knew we were going to have this talk today, right? And I was looking at it. And if you have a list of anywhere from 5 to 10 things that are concerning elderly people, right? Their money and their health are always on the list.
Yeah.
Right. And what's interesting is some of the other things like being able to take care of themselves really is a health issue.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what's just doubling that up, right? Or fear of falling, right? That's another health issue, right? If you and then of course the challenge of health issues is if you end up getting sick, guess what it does? It sucks up your money.
Yep.
right? So then there's that kind of circle part. And then the last piece you talk, legacy is such an interesting thing. Life insurance, I worked in life insurance years ago, and again, I'm not a licensed insurance agent anymore, right?
Yep.
But the real simple thing is life insurance has a purpose,
Yep.
right? It's either to replace income or take care of costs at the end,
Yep.
right? So if you're accumulating assets over time, the need for insurance starts to diminish.
Yep.
The challenge is if you never accumulate any assets, then what happens at the end,
Yep.
right? So that's part of it. And then again, to your point, from a legacy standpoint, we'll get into the types of kinds of investments you have. But at the end of the day, the question is, are you going to have enough retirement money, enough financial money
Yep.
to live and leave some stuff behind? Or to your point, are you just going to be that person that, hey, I barely got through with what I had?
Yep.
Right? And
Yep.
a lot of that depends on what you're investing in and how you do it. And so we get into that here when we get to
For sure.
the section.
And I think when it comes to life insurance, it is, I think, very crucial. I know that there's tons of people who see life insurance as an asset as well, because even if you have all of these things, such as a house and cars and all that stuff, property, that's just an added benefit that you can add into, like, say, oh, well, if I pass away, funeral's taken care of, and I can leave my kids an extra $100,000 each.
Right.
Or my wife doesn't have to worry about, anything, she can take a trip to Bermuda and grieve in Bermuda if she wanted to.
Well, and to that point too, and whatever income that you were bringing in
Yep.
is actually be replaced.
Exactly.
Because you might be doing great, and everyone's doing everything right. You got your budget, and you're filling all the
sure.
dots. But then $50,000 gets taken out of the budget. I don't think that budget's going to work anymore.
For sure.
Right, and so that's the idea of insurance, is to replace that, whether it's 50 grand, 75 grand, 100 grand, whatever it is that you're making, so that things continue to flow. They're not going to replace you, obviously, right? You can't do that, but at least replacing.
Well, I mean, and the hardest thing to see is like a lot of these GoFundMes.
Yeah.
That, like, someone passed away and everybody's doing a GoFundMe to raise money for funeral costs and also help out the family and everything like that. And that could have been very easily fixed if they understood, like, life insurance and the importance of getting it early and just having it there and having it be this is my cost of living.
I think you made a point about, is the credit card a tool, right? Or literally, is the bank using you as the tool?
Hey, there you go.